Hey guys, welcome to the Rants channel, your home for NFL predictions, analysis, and of course, your periodic rant. Black Monday 2020, it has come and gone. Happy New Year, by the way. Welcome to 2021. And we have 6 head coach openings. Black Monday is generally a day that no team really wants to be a part of. Black Monday is when a team does terribly, and they do terribly and fire their head coach, and sometimes even more than that. We have 6 teams to discuss in this video as far as head coach openings. There are also 4 general manager openings we'll be talking about as well. I'm going to be going over all of the pros and cons of all the teams going forward, reasons to take the job, reasons to possibly stay away from it. But before I do, the logos that you're about to see are not owned by me. They are owned by the NFL. That is in the description. All the copyrights go to them for the links. But in regards to this video, if you like what you see, comment down below something you want to see me discuss on the channel as far as the NFL goes. Leave a like on the video, hit that subscribe button, and let's get going here. All right, so these are the 6 teams that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to start with what might have stuck out to you because I'm using an old logo, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I know they have a new logo, and they've had a new logo for, I don't know, like 5, 6, 7 years now, but I like this one better. And I like the old uniforms better, but whatever, that's not the point of the video. Jacksonville, man, oh man, they've got a lot of really good things coming up. So the biggest pro is something that I predicted 2 years ago. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but we're about 95, 96% sure that Jacksonville is getting Trevor Lawrence. If you guys watched my AFC South predictions video back in the summertime, then you will have known that Trevor Lawrence was my pick to go to Jacksonville. They were my pick to get him. And I actually predicted this at the end of 2019, 2 years ago almost. I predicted that when Trevor Lawrence was eligible, he'd be going to Jacksonville. I took a lot of heat for that from outside sources, and surprise, surprise, it aged actually pretty well. So far, anyway. Unless, of course, Trevor Lawrence decides not to go into the draft and opts out. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we'll take a look at that. But right now, the number 1 overall pick, 4 picks in the first 2 rounds, and Jacksonville has $73.7 million pending, of course, any restricted contracts and extensions that would free up more cap space. That's the most in the league. And that would appeal to any general manager coming in because they can overhaul the way that they would see fit. And for a head coach, that is definitely something you want. You want to be able to start your own legacy with a team like this, with a quarterback that has the appeal of Andrew Luck, if he declares, and of course Jacksonville pulls the trigger. Now, a lot of teams have been linking Dabo Swinney, including, I've also toyed with the idea of Dabo Swinney to the Jaguars, but this is really just wishful thinking. It could happen, but it also could not happen. Dabo Swinney is in a good place in Clemson, and if he decided to make the jump with Trevor Lawrence, it's not necessarily impossible, but it's a bit improbable. I mean, we've seen college quarterbacks and college coach connections from college linger over to the NFL. Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury is a perfect example for the Arizona Cardinals. But is that necessarily going to be the same here? And if Dabo Swinney does look into NFL coaching jobs, he also could go to Houston and reunite with another Clemson quarterback you might all remember, Deshaun Watson. So this is not a lock, but it is something that is a very interesting topic during the offseason. Now, pros for Jacksonville, too, are they have a few more building blocks than teams that are sort of ground zero. They've got DJ Chark, they've got Cam Robinson, who had a great rookie season in terms of what the Jaguars actually were. And Jacksonville might not have any Pro Bowlers, but they have also got a lot of room to sign potential playmakers. And make no mistake about it, Jacksonville has a lot of leverage to sign and draft the right players. Now, obviously, the cons for the Jaguars, of course, are the unknown and the defense. Now, Jacksonville, much like Detroit and Atlanta, and honestly a lot of these teams, don't really have a strong defense. Now, Jacksonville can fix this by bringing in the right coordinator. We saw what happened with a team like Buffalo where the defense was good, but then you bring in the right head coach and coordinator, and surprise, surprise, the defense does better. Jacksonville, I remember at one point, had a really strong defense. They were called Saxonville. They were in the AFC title game. You all know that. But that felt like eons ago. This is a new Jaguars team. These are going to be a different type of Jaguars that might dominate on offense, and that's totally fine. But you also, in a division with Deshaun Watson, in a division with the Tennessee Titans, you better have an answer on defense, and Jacksonville, I think, will address this. But if they don't, that's going to really scare a lot of people away. When free agency starts, look for the Jaguars to be big players. And speaking of quarterbacks that we are fond of, speaking of rookie quarterbacks that did a really good job and might do a really good job, let's take a look at the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, this was probably the biggest surprise on my list. The Los Angeles Chargers, the biggest pro, and I'm not trying to sound like a broken record and only pick quarterbacks here, but for Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence, if he even goes, we can't confirm that he's there yet. But for Los Angeles, we can confirm that Justin Herbert is there. And this is actually another quarterback prediction I made last year. I actually said Justin Herbert would do better than Tua, possibly Joe Burrow. And it's unfair to say Joe Burrow because he got hurt, but I said Justin Herbert would do better than Tua, and that actually aged pretty well. It was a bold prediction based on Tua's market appeal, but Justin Herbert, a lot of people forget, before the Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray connection was established in Arizona, Justin Herbert was projected to go number one in a lot of mock drafts, but then, of course, he decided not to declare, went back to Oregon, and the rest is history. Kyler Murray went to Arizona, and Justin Herbert ended up going 6th overall to the Chargers. But now I can see why he was declared number one at one point. He played like a first-round pick. He played like a number one overall pick. He played very well, which is really why I was a little bit surprised about Anthony Lynn being fired. Not that I think that he should have been extended or anything like that, but if the main purpose of Anthony Lynn staying in 2020 was to help Justin Herbert develop, well, I think that he did a good job of that. Justin Herbert played very well, broke the rookie touchdown record, got over 4,000 yards, which a lot of quarterbacks that are in the playoffs didn't even get, but that's besides the point. And 7-9 might not be the sexiest record, but it's not as bad as really any other team on this list. Maybe Los Angeles has a different plan up their sleeve for Justin Herbert, but they really better find the right coach to help him develop and not pull a New York Jets. The biggest cons for the Chargers, in my opinion, it's really defense. And I mean defense in terms of linebackers. They don't have, other than Melvin Ingram, they don't have a lot. And they do have $22 million in cap space that they can use, but they might be waiting to extend certain players. And I think that they should really be focused more on their offensive line than their defense. But especially when you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert. But the idea of possibly a really good defensive player might convince the Chargers to make a splash. Now, the Chargers are one of two teams on this list that will have the same general manager. So it won't be a complete overhaul for the Chargers, and that could be a big pro for whatever coach is coming in. It would only basically just be picking up the pieces and trying to get a better defense going. But Los Angeles really is not that bad of a team. They had a really poor start, and they went from 3-8 to 7-9, which is a decent second half of the season, but obviously we want to see more out of this team. And the Chargers have the potential to really make things interesting, especially if Justin Herbert continues to grow. Keep an eye on the Chargers this season. And speaking of getting the right coach, speaking of developing quarterbacks, let's look at someone who has done the exact opposite, little Adam Gase in the New York Jets. Now, when Adam Gase was first hired 2 years ago, I was one of the first to say, how do people not see this is a terrible idea? Adam Gase is probably the worst coach on this entire list of firings. He makes Matt Patricia and Bill O'Brien look like Tom Landry and honestly maybe even Bill Belichick. He makes them look amazing. And the reason I say that is not because Adam Gase doesn't have a championship ring like the other two. it's because he's just a dumpster fire. I mean, even a broken clock is right twice a day, and Bill O'Brien had a couple of division titles, and Matt Patricia at least was part of the Patriots regime at one point. But Adam Gase has struck out almost every single time. People give him credit for Peyton Manning's comeback season in Denver, but Peyton Manning was doing all kinds of great things before Adam Gase. And if you want a perfect example of how Adam Gase failed before the Jets, look at the Miami Dolphins. Ryan Tannehill spent, I believe, 5 or 6 seasons, probably 5, I think he got hurt one year, but 5 seasons he spent with Adam Gase. And Adam Gase just didn't help him develop. I mean, Ryan Tannehill was drafted in the middle of the first round, and people forget that during his time on the Dolphins because he just didn't look great. He was the victim of a lot of ridicule from, well, let's be honest, Patriots fans, but a lot of which was justified. He wasn't playing well. But Adam Gase got fired, and Ryan Tannehill got traded to Tennessee, and Ryan Tannehill has had a resurgence. He's had a whole brand new career. He's looked amazing. You could even argue Ryan Tannehill possibly could be in the talks for top 10 quarterbacks in the entire NFL. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but it wouldn't be completely unreasonable to think that. And Adam Gase just failed completely with Sam Darnold. I knew the second Adam Gase came that Sam Darnold was going to be basically taking the rap for a lot of Adam Gase's mistakes. Now, let's get into the pros of the Jets now that the biggest problem in New York is gone. The pros for the New York Jets, much like the Jaguars, are they do have a lot of room in the salary cap. They have a little under $70 million. They've got approximately $68.7 million, which is the second most in the league. And that is pretty good for a team rebuilding, but the biggest problem with the Jets is that they don't really have anything. I mean, the Jaguars at least have some pieces, but the Jets really don't have much. I can count on one hand, maybe, how many pieces the Jets have, and those pieces are not necessarily Pro Bowl pieces. They're just pieces. Sam Darnold might be gone, and if he is, hey, you know what? Let him find a new team and have a great career and show reason number 500 why Adam Gase is a complete failure. And if the Jets do draft a quarterback with the second overall pick, which they very well could, it would just be basically making more problems, which is a big con of this team. They might not have enough money to really get everything they need to become a playoff contender. And let's be honest, I don't expect them to be. The Jets rebuild, at the very least, will take 2 years. And the Jets are just not a team that really entertains me, really excites me right now because of just the complete mediocrity of their season. The fact that they went 7-9 under Adam Gase's first season was nothing short of dumb luck, and this proved it. The Jets, I believe, will get rid of Sam Darnold, but honestly, I don't think that Sam Darnold should take all of the blame for what's going on in New York. They don't have a team. They haven't had the right head coach, I believe, since Rex Ryan got fired. Todd Bowles, to his credit, did give them a 10-6 season, but the Jets have just struck out with head coaches. Out of all the teams on this list, the Jets are the only one that has not been in the playoffs, and 3 of these 5 teams were either winning their division or in a conference championship or in a Super Bowl, and we'll get to the 28-3 jokes later, but right now we need to talk about the Jets and finish up with that. They do have a lot of early draft picks, much like Jacksonville. That could appeal. They also have the same GM, so it won't be basically a massive overhaul in terms of the front office, but there are going to be some big changes in the locker room, and whoever the Jets bring in, they need to make sure that they can resonate with Sam Darnold, or if it's a different quarterback, resonate with him. And I mean really resonate, not just quote-unquote resonate. And speaking of head coaching failures, we're going to move on to Detroit, but before we do, I also want to point out that any one of these 6 teams with the right coach, with the right offseason, could become a good team. I believe every single one of these teams, except for, of course, the Texans, because Jacksonville takes that crown, and the Chargers, I know, came in second place, but every one of these other teams came in last place in their divisions, and we've seen teams go from worst to first and win it all. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Detroit is the next team I want to talk about. Head coaching, complete dumpster fires. Matt Patricia, this is even more amusing to me than the Jets, and here's why. Before Matt Patricia was hired, 4 seasons, the Lions had former Colts head coach Jim Caldwell, and Jim Caldwell was there giving them 3 winning records, 2 postseason berths, and more importantly, his worst season as a Detroit Lions head coach, which wasn't even the season he was fired, by the way, was a 7-9 record. Matt Patricia, his best record wasn't even better than that. And I'm still a little bit confused as to why the Lions fired Jim Caldwell. A lot of people really seem to be. But this is what I mean when a franchise gets spoiled. The idea of somebody's table scraps, he being Bill Belichick. We all know Bill Belichick is one of the best head coaches in the league, despite the Patriots' finish this year. I don't even think that really matters. Bill Belichick is one of the best coaches in the league, and when you see a Bill Belichick disciple, naturally you want to try and replicate what he did. I mean, Bill Parcells made Bill Belichick, and Belichick is possibly Bill Parcells' and is Bill Parcells' biggest achievement, except for the 2 Super Bowls he won, but I meant in terms of coaching tree. Matt Patricia is just that. He is a table scrap from Bill Belichick, which on paper sounds great, but defensive coordinator on the Patriots is really a misnomer because we all know who calls the plays in New England, and for Matt Patricia to be hired based on that, give me a break. And the Lions just looked horrible. They were a laughingstock in the NFC. I mean, they were arguably, I believe, one of the worst NFC teams the past 2 out of the last 3 years, and rightfully so. And it's no coincidence that once Matt Patricia got fired, the Lions actually had a few wins at the end of the season. Surprise, surprise, surprise to absolutely no one. The Lions need to get the right head coach and GM because both are Belichick's table scraps. I have nothing against the Patriots or Bill Belichick for that matter. I think both have had their own success, both as a whole and separately. But Matt Patricia is not Bill Belichick. He's not even close. And speaking of Bill Belichick's table scraps, the next team I'm going to move on to is the Houston Texans. But the biggest pros for the Lions would be the fact that their offense is pretty well rounded. I mean, that was something Jim Caldwell put in place, and obviously that looks pretty good. And their biggest con, I think, would be the fact that they are still rebuilding a lot of their defense. Not to sound like a broken record here, but a lot of these teams' problems are defense, and the Lions really don't have any stars that really stick out to me. I mean, even their first-round pick, Jeffrey Okudah, has a lot of room to improve, but he's a rookie, so I'm more lenient to let that slide. But Detroit right now does not appeal to me in terms of defense. And look at who they have in their division. They've got Dalvin Cook, they've got Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones, and they don't exactly have a lot of money in cap space. They have $10.5 million, and that's not a lot of room to make big moves. So they need to get it right in the draft, and they need to get it right with restructured deals, and they need to bring in the right coach that can make a mountain out of a molehill. And that might seem difficult, but it's not impossible. We've seen it happen. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the Houston Texans. Bill O'Brien. This was probably one of the worst puns in the NFL. I believe Bill O'Brien was the first coach to be fired this season, and honestly, it should have been done a long time ago. I mean, I say all the time Matt Patricia and Adam Gase should have never been hired, but Bill O'Brien should have been fired long ago. Now, a big argument is that he's been able to win his division a couple of times, and that he drafted Deshaun Watson and gave him a big paycheck, but even a broken clock is right twice a day. And you heard me say that earlier, but that's why I was saying it. Because, again, nobody is going to make a mistake every minute of their existence, but Bill O'Brien was right to extend Deshaun Watson. Even I, who know absolutely nothing about being an NFL general manager or even head coach or really anything about the front office, even I know to extend Deshaun Watson and pay him like the Pro Bowl quarterback that he is. He is Houston's shining star, and he is a big reason why a lot of teams would probably go towards Houston and really be attracted to the Texans on paper. But in terms of cons, Houston also does not exactly have a lot of money in cap space. In fact, they're $21 million over the cap. So it's not like they can go around and basically pay anybody and everybody. As well as that, they don't have a first round draft pick this year because of the dreadful Laramie Tunsil trade. Look, on paper, you want to get somebody to protect your quarterback, but Bill O'Brien completely overpaid for Laramie Tunsil. He also did the disastrous DeAndre Hopkins trade, which I don't even know why that was even made in the first place. People say it was about money, but I think it was terrible. Houston right now is a team that has a lot of good in terms of Deshaun Watson, in terms of J.J. Watt. You have building blocks, which I don't think any of these teams, except for maybe Los Angeles, has won on both sides of the ball. Houston does, but they also don't have money or draft stock to really rebuild. Any GM and head coach combination coming in, Cal McNair, needs to understand that Houston is not going to go from pretender to contender overnight. Deshaun Watson has the caliber to boost this team up to 6 or 7 wins, especially with a third place schedule, but it's not a given, and Houston honestly could be drafting in the top 10 next year depending on injuries and everything else that happens. Don't be surprised if they do, and if they do, don't blame it on J.J. Watt, don't blame it on Deshaun Watson, blame it on Bill O'Brien gutting this team to almost its bare skeleton. I mean, no one can fix this in a year. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the final team, the Atlanta Falcons. And this is a team, Atlanta has been a victim of circumstance so many times. Cue the 28-3 jokes. But seriously, Atlanta going 28-3 and losing the Super Bowl is mainly a stem of a bigger problem, and that's their defense. I mean, their offense is playing well. I mean, the year they went 28-3, Matt Ryan in the Super Bowl, had 28-3. You know the joke. Matt Ryan was the MVP that year, and he didn't get that by sitting around on his ass. He got that by playing well, and maybe every year since then has not been, gumdrops and, fairy tales, but Matt Ryan has not been the biggest problem in the Dirty South. The biggest problem for the Dirty Birds has been their defense. And when you have a head coach like Dan Quinn that's supposed to apparently be a defensive guru, and you would think so, it didn't exactly age well. I mean, I was the one who said Atlanta should have really, and Rex Ryan should have went to Atlanta. Now, whether that would have worked better or not, that's anybody's guess. But Rex Ryan had a little bit more appeal as an individual head coach, whereas Dan Quinn was more of a new disciple. But Dan Quinn really also was a victim of circumstance, too. There wasn't a lot of money. There wasn't a lot of defensive stars that Atlanta could build around. That year they went to the Super Bowl was probably the best they looked, and that really is not that great. And this reminds me a lot of the Detroit circumstance. Almost mirror images. The biggest pros are their offense. Their quarterback plays decently. They've got weapons. They've got a decent offensive line. Biggest cons for me is arguably their defense. And I mean, look at what Atlanta has been on defense this year. They have been terrible. I mean, they looked a little bit better when Raheem Morris took over as the interim head coach, but by then Atlanta was just not even a factor at that point. So a lot of that could be taken with a grain of salt. Was that garbage time? Was that actual time? Atlanta also is one of 3 teams on here that have a top 5 draft pick. They go 4th. And a lot of teams have actually been spectating whether or not Atlanta will take a quarterback, and I think that's a bad idea. I think they need to get one of the best defensive players in the draft. They are projected to possibly grab the first defensive player overall. Jags and Jets might get a quarterback. Miami, with Houston's pick, will probably take a wide receiver. That means the door is open for Atlanta to pretty much get whatever defensive player they want, or trade down and get stock, which I don't know how that would work, but you never know. And it's not like Atlanta can also dip into the salary cap, because if you thought Houston was bad at minus 21 over the cap, Atlanta is $32 million over the cap as well, 32.4 to be exact. They're not exactly in a position where they can spend either. But at the end of the day, this is a team, Atlanta, that has a lot of appeal offensively. But again, Atlanta, out of all of these teams, probably has the worst reputation for blowing leads and everything else, but with the right head coach, that can all be changed. I mean, we've seen teams go from, like I said, worst to first. I think of Philadelphia 3 years ago when they went to the Super Bowl. They went from worst to first and won it all. So I'm not saying any of these teams are going to win the Super Bowl. That's a big stretch, but it is possible. It's just difficult. Now, out of all of these teams, I think the most appealing job right now, it's a toss-up between Los Angeles and Jacksonville. Obviously, every team as I've covered have pros and cons. But right now, if I'm looking at Jacksonville, 4 picks in the first 2 rounds, the most money to spend, and a last place schedule, that to me is almost the epitome of an appealing job. That almost screams playoff berth at me with the right head coach. Los Angeles has probably the quarterback with the biggest upside, with the exception of Deshaun Watson. Trevor Lawrence, I'm sure, will have a pretty good career too, but he hasn't played a single snap in the NFL. It's not fair to say. And we know what Matt Stafford and Matt Ryan can do, but they're, of course, on the wrong side of 30 both. So if you like this video, please again make sure to leave a subscribe on the channel, leave a like on the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.